Hi, it's Mark Bernard here with the Bernard Institute. I want to thank you and welcome back. For those who have been following me, I appreciate that. Don't forget to share and like my videos so that we can spread the word about cybersecurity. Today, we're talking about cybersecurity risk assessments. This is an important topic. This is a waterfall approach I'm about to show you that I've been using for probably about 15 years or more. I found it used in many organizations in the US who seem to have adopted this and enjoy using it, and a few Canadians. So without further ado, let's carry on, shall we? And remember, cybersecurity knows no boundaries, right? That's our theme. Okay, cybersecurity knows no boundaries, right? And so the risk assessment process, where does it start? It starts with scoping. Now, what I'm thinking about doing actually is I'm going to start a certificate program from my website. And it's going to be a certificate and cybersecurity risk assessment. It might be like certified professional cybersecurity risk evaluator or risk analyst or risk manager. I haven't quite decided yet, but maybe you can help me. Leave some comments on my video. Don't forget to share and like my videos, please. Scoping. So scoping of any type of a risk assessment. In this case, I'm talking about the information security management system, but it could be any environment that you're looking at. So what does scoping mean? Scoping means taking a look at what services or products need to be risk evaluated. Maybe it's something very specific. So my approach could look at something as small as maybe a smartphone or a server or a laptop, or could look at this approach can be expanded. It's completely expandable to up to an enterprise. I've evaluated entire health authorities and international organizations. A health authority that has 130 facilities and 19,000 clinicians and 30,000 assets. That was a big risk assessment to do. I've also evaluated cloud service providers around the globe based in the US. Those are a little bit easier actually than health authorities. Health authorities are a little bit trickier. Lots of details. So scoping means basically, identifying what the locations are, who the people are in scope, what types of hardware, software, telecommunications devices are involved, and what type of information they're using. Information is a bit tricky because some types of information has like branches into other areas. So of course, if you want to protect information, you have to know where the information flows and where it travels and how it might be modified and where it could be modified or intercepted. So there's a lot of things around information when you do a risk assessment that involves information. You have to do data flows, and you'd have to do that if you're involved in GDPR or any other privacy legislation. So that's normal. But this is all part of the scoping. So you identify what the scope is, and if you check back, I'm going to have a scoping video, a little mini video giving you an explanation of what scoping is. This is my new approach. I'm trying to make my videos much shorter, trying to make them more informative so that you don't spend time, because some of my videos in the past, as you'll see on my website if you've gone to check it out, are like 2.5 hours. So they're very long. And of course, my seminars are 4 or 5 days long if you want to learn everything all at once in 1 week. So it's like a boot camp, right? Okay, so scoping is the first activity that you would go on. You then identify the assets that are in scope. Again, so the 6 assets that I look at, because they share common vulnerabilities, are people, information, software, hardware, telecommunications, and facilities. So I look at the assets. We might not always get the assets on the first go when we're doing a risk assessment. So first of all, we draw a scope, and then we'll identify what assets are in it. And we might come back and we might have missed some assets, so we'll add those assets back into the scope as we go through the process. Completely fluid. Okay? And then we're going to identify what are the vulnerabilities associated with the asset. This is a little bit different approach than some of the older risk management frameworks, because they tend to take a completely different approach. But really, this is the best approach that I'm showing you. So by identifying the assets and identifying the vulnerabilities associated with the assets, now we have kind of a clear picture, right? So if we have people, for instance, we know what kinds of vulnerabilities that they're exposed to. Unfortunately, viruses, as you have seen from the pandemic. But there's also other things too. As we grow older, maybe we lose our memories. We can't remember things. A lot of the information that we gather as we work at an organization belongs to the organization, so it needs to be recorded. But people generally develop knowledge in their minds, so they have tacit information which they bring to the organization. It's knowledge managers refer to it as things that you don't know that you know. Okay, and then you have implicit information. So if you have skills and you come to a company and you're hired to do a specific job, while you're doing that job, you're going to apply some of that knowledge and experience in order to take care of specific processes. If you're working in accounting, you might be doing a reconciliation of accounts. If you're doing access and identity management, you may need to understand how the framework works and be able to populate it. And you might, over time, develop and innovate and develop new processes and new techniques around that process. So that information needs to be documented. So it needs to be transferred from implicit to explicit. So this becomes an asset of the organization, an asset that could be vulnerable to different vulnerabilities. So you need to evaluate it. But first you need scope. You need to identify the assets in scope, and then you need to identify the vulnerabilities. Again, sometimes we don't always realize what all the vulnerabilities are to begin with. So we might create a loop. We might go back and add and identify new vulnerabilities and then bring those forward. Once we have the vulnerabilities identified, then we need to identify what is the potential impact to the principles of information security. So you have confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So if you have a piece of hardware and it needs to be running all the time, then you need to be able to monitor the maintenance on it. You need to be able to monitor the faulting on it. So you probably have some operators, or maybe you have the device reporting into a log that gets sent to the SIEM, the Security Information Event Management System. And maybe you have a group of people in a security operations center, a SOC, who monitor the activity of the infrastructure so that they know when devices are having problems, and then they can treat them, because it could create an outage if they don't. So, and they may also be looking at the integrity of processes. So a lot of times, for instance, when accountants do month-end close, right, they have to reconcile their accounts. They may have some exception reporting. They may have some updates to make to those accounts. But it's very important, because moving forward, that record becomes a part of the corporation and how we report on taxes and revenue. And so that data, the integrity around that data is important. But the integrity of the data is contingent upon the integrity of the process. And we identify risks within a process. So we have multiple steps within each process. And that's kind of what some of these frameworks that you see, like the ISO 27001 and the PCI and the APII and many other the cybersecurity framework for financial institutions in New York. There's many FedRAMP. There's NIST frameworks. There's the NIST cybersecurity framework. There's NIST 853. There's so many different frameworks. A lot of these frameworks try to identify what are the risks associated with particular types of processes, and then they try to provide advice on how to mitigate those risks. It's not always perfect, because a lot of times this information is coming from one group of people, where you really need to involve a lot of different types of people from different professions in order to make those controls effective. Anyway, yet I digress. And so that's integrity of data. So integrity of the process is really what drives the integrity of the information, and you need to protect that information. You may have some particular types of controls that you use. I mentioned reconciliation as one way, but you may also use encryption, for instance, to protect information. And then there's confidentiality. So this really ties into the privacy and the GDPR stuff. So you have company information, but you may also have customer information, and you definitely have employee information. So this information needs to be protected so that it remains confidential, because the last thing you want to have is unauthorized disclosure, which is where you have maybe a breach of security, and some of your confidential information or private information gets released to people who should not have access to it. So we look at the scope, we identify the assets in scope, we identify the vulnerabilities, and then we evaluate what is the impact if that vulnerability gets exploited. What could possibly go wrong if you lose confidentiality, if you lose integrity, or if you lose availability. Now we might, again, go through the cycle a couple times until we iron it out and we perfect it, because my process is driving toward a quantitative risk assessment approach, where we calculate what the risk rating is in the end. This is not qualitative. This is quantitative. Very different. Okay, so once we have the business impact identified, then we look at what type of threats. So this is also known as threat modeling. So we look at what type of threats could potentially exploit that exposure. So we'll evaluate a number of threats. Now remember, threats are people, not software. Okay, software is weaponized by threat agents. Threat agents are things like, or people like foreign governments, organized crime, could be competitors, could be disgruntled employees who might have an insider threat. There's a lot of different potential threats or threat agents, some people refer to it as, that could potentially exploit the vulnerabilities in your assets and which would have a business impact to your organization. Now, you might go through this process. You might identify one threat, and you go through the process of mapping it out to the asset and identifying the vulnerabilities. And then you might come back and you do a second swoop, and you find there are more types of threats or more threats that could exploit different types of threats. So you could have several types of threats to your organization depending on what you do. So some organizations are a higher value target. So that's one of the keys, right, about your organization, where you sit in the supply chain, is are you a high value target? Do people seek to expose you or expose the information or get access to the information? So if you're a big company and you have a lot of patents, maybe it's advantageous for a foreign government to steal those patents so that they could reverse engineer them and come out with the same technology and then compete against you and your industry, which is terrible. But that does happen. It happens a lot, actually, unfortunately. So that's one of the things you want to protect. Perhaps you have medical technology. Maybe you have, for instance, with the pandemic, maybe you have the COVID-19 formula on how to build the antidote for that virus to resolve it, the vaccine. And maybe some foreign governments want to have access to that because, the amount of money that an organization spends on research and development is huge. It's usually like 30 or 40% of the overall cost that companies try to reclaim when they sell their products finally when it goes to market. But they may not be able to right away, and so it's a big investment for them. But for somebody to come in and steal it, they don't have to go through the R&D process. Well, it's like pure profit, right? So they clone and reverse engineer the product. So you need to be able to identify who your threats are. If you are indeed a high value target, if you have something that people want, and that they'll go to great lengths in order to hack into and to steal. Okay, so we've identified the scope, the assets in scope. We've evaluated the vulnerabilities associated with those assets, and they all have different ones. So software is different than humans, and information is different than software or hardware, so it's all different. And then you identify the impact to the business, and now you've connected that to the threat exposure. Now, the next step in the process is to evaluate existing controls, because one of the big pet peeves with a lot of senior managers is that they have consultants come in, they do cybersecurity risk assessments, and they make all kinds of recommendations. And this is, who's famous for this are the big four accounting firms. So talk about PwC, Deloitte, EY. There's a lot of big accounting firms that will come in once a year. They'll do an evaluation of the controls, for instance, for SOC 2 or SOC 3, and they'll make a lot of recommendations without any consideration for what the organization has already done, which is bad. So the first question they should always ask is, have you done a risk assessment? Because you're going to find out how important the risk assessment is. It's how you control your environment by doing risk assessments and thinking in a risk management kind of mindset. But the important thing is if you're doing the cybersecurity risk assessment, is you want to look at the existing controls. So have they implemented firewalls? Probably. So they get some credit for that. Have they implemented load balancers? How about reverse proxies? How about natting or some of those other great technologies, right, that you can implement, IPS? If they've implemented those things, you got to give them some credit for reducing the exposure to that threat agent from exploiting the vulnerabilities of the asset. So we try to do that. We try to give them some credit by reducing the risk rating by percentages based on how effective that control is. So we look at the control, we see if it can mitigate the risk, and if it can, maybe it can reduce the risk rating considerably. But if it can't, then it might have a small impact or maybe no impact. Also, there's also the possibility that they have already invested in some type of security technology, but it hasn't been optimized. So maybe it hasn't been configured properly or set up properly. Maybe it's not looking at the right area of the business or the right type of traffic coming across the network. So if that's the case, then maybe you could take the existing technology, and rather than recommending that the company buy, another $200,000 appliance, maybe they can take the existing appliance and optimize it and tweak it and make it, design it in a way that will address whatever the threat is that you've identified. Maybe they have the technology that was implemented, but it wasn't implemented properly. So it's not mitigating the risk. And you would only know that by doing some security testing. So that could be part of the actual evaluation of existing controls, as you could do some security testing like pen testing or black box or gray box or blue box testing. You could do some type of testing in order to find out if that control is effective. That could be part of your risk assessment approach. Okay, so again, we have the scope, we have the assets, we looked at the vulnerabilities associated with the assets, we looked at the impact to the organization from a confidentiality, integrity, availability. We've looked at the threats that could potentially expose that, and now we've evaluated the controls in order to determine if they get some credit for what they've already invested in, which is a very good thing to do, a very positive thing to do for your management team. Okay, now we may not identify all the controls. So it's possible that we might write the risk assessment first draft, review it with management, and management might say, oh, wait a minute, what about this? Or what about that? So we might have to go back and tweak or retune the risk assessment so that it's more accurate, which is very important. And then we finally calculate the risk rating, and we report that to senior management. So there should be a governance committee who is made up of all the top portfolio owners. So the executive team responsible for each part of the business should sit on that governance committee. And the reason why is because they make decisions around the resources and the capital that could be invested into mitigating risks. And also they own the risk. So they own the risk for their particular area. And this gets back, if you looked at my other videos that we talked about for the risk universe, and how we build the backbone and how we identify what the product or service is, and then we can roll up the risks around that. It's very important that if we could tell an executive who's responsible for a portfolio within the organization what the risk is that his group is exposed to, then he will take some action, or she will take some action on that. Okay, so very important on how you articulate your report and do the risk calculating. The risk calculation and the risk rating is so important to prioritize the risks. So that they know what are the critical or extreme risks that need to be addressed versus what are the highs or the mediums or the lows that can wait or go into a continual improvement plan. And again, we might take a couple swipes. It might take a couple iterations of doing the risk calculation and the reporting. It's possible that if you're working on an engagement and you're in the commercial sector, that you do a draft report and you meet with the senior management team, you review it, and you get some feedback from them, and then you go away and you might modify your report in order to make it more accurate. And then finally, when the governance committee meets and they finally agree on what the risks are that they're going to treat, it goes into a risk treatment plan until it's resolved. So the risk treatment plan is a dashboard. It's something that the executive team or the governance team will monitor. You might meet with them on a monthly or quarterly or semi-annual basis to review the risk treatment plan. It might be available on a dashboard that they have on their phone so that they know every day how the risks are being treated, and making sure that the risks are being tracked. And if there's any issues in resolving a risk, because we're going to talk about this in another video about quality management and about corrective actions and preventative actions and what goes into that risk treatment plan and how you define that to management. So we'll talk about that in another video because, again, I'm trying to keep these videos short. So they'll track that risk and the corrective action or preventative action plan until it's resolved. And if there's any issues, the governance committee are the perfect people to address whatever the problem is that's come up that's created a roadblock for you to resolve this risk. Okay? And the risk treatment plan, again, it will be reported back to the governance committee until it's resolved. All right. And there you go. So this is the Cybersecurity Risk Assessment Waterfall. And each of the blocks that we described on that waterfall, okay, I'm going to be providing individual lessons on this. So short little lessons. I'm going to talk about scoping, one I'm going to talk about assets, about vulnerabilities, about business impacts. I'm going to have a lesson on threats, one lesson on existing control evaluation, one on calculating the risk rating, and finally one on producing a risk treatment plan. So if you come back, you're going to find many different videos. Again, please like and share so that everybody gets to share this information and they can use it. Everybody can use it who's involved in cybersecurity. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find my company website on LinkedIn. You can find it on Facebook. You can find me in YouTube. I also have my company website, bernardinstitute.com, and we provide videos through Vimeo, so you can sign up and register. You can pay an annual fee and be on my mailing list, and you can get access that way, or you can just follow me and see what I'm posting, okay? So thank you for your time, and I hope you have a great day, and I hope that you found this useful, and don't forget to like and share. Thank you.